There we
The
go.
silent have been given voice. Okay.
Fantastic. So I was just chatting with folks a little bit and um, letting them know that you'd be coming on as soon as you could find your way. So now we both have to settle our nerves after having the first little bit of a technology burp. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad you
Well,
made it back.
when I knew it wasn't all my fault, I felt much better.
Yes, it wasn't at all your fault. Technology has a way of doing that. So it's really great to have you here. So it looks like maybe some people are also we weren't the only people having trouble getting in. Looks like we're seeing some other people having trouble. I'm just seeing in the chat. So hopefully people can find their way here. So Dr. Doherty, let me just go ahead and introduce you to our guests today and to those who may be picking up this webinar later. You have done so much across your career to help families, to help couples. You've got a very prestigious award from AMFT about being a significant contributor to the field. You have written so much, both for the professional audience and the public audience, for the lay public, like Take Back Your Marriage, sticking together in a world that pulls us apart. I really like your book, Soul Searching, Why Psychotherapy Must Promote Moral Responsibility. Of course, in many family therapy books and family theory books that you've both written in and edited or written for. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about what's inspired you across the years to stick so closely in the field to helping couples and families?
Well, I felt a little tired listening to all that, but I guess what I'd say, just really briefly, is that I feel like I've had my most important kind of breakthroughs, at least in my own thinking, when I've connected to people outside of our field. So when I worked in medical settings and helped to develop something called medical family therapy, and that's when I discovered that families are made up of people with bodies, because that never occurred to us in graduate school. And then I got involved with community organizers, so a whole piece of my work is around working with families in community settings. And then recently with collaborative divorce lawyers and mediators and a family court judge, that led to this work in discernment counseling. So for me, it's been really stimulating to stretch outside of the field and then figure out what I can bring back in. So that's probably a theme.
That's a really wonderful theme. The whole idea, I think, of psychology and growth and being really person-centered myself, that idea of continuing to grow across the lifespan and to learn has been so important, and that certainly sounds like that's been something that's driven you as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So more recently, you have been involved the last several years, and I think it's been ongoing for quite a while, but it's really come to fruition, this idea of working with highly ambivalent couples where they're on the brink, and it kind of came out of your On the Brink project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so probably must have been 6 or 7 years ago now. A family court judge, the new chief judge of the family court in Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis and its surrounding towns, gave me a call and said he'd like to have coffee with me to talk about something he was observing in the family court. And I always like to say that when a judge calls me to have coffee, I always have coffee. You know, you can never tell when you might need a friend in the court system. Anyway, so we chatted, and Bruce Peterson, Judge Peterson, had the advantage of never having been a divorce lawyer, you know, so he came fresh to all of this as a judge. And in their very progressive county court system, the judges meet with couples outside of the chambers, no, judicial robes on, for an early conversation about the process and encouraging them to avoid litigation, that sort of thing. And what Judge Peterson observed is how well some of these couples were doing. they come in. They were cooperative. They smiled at each other. They seemed some of them seemed even affectionate. And he was also impressed by how hard it is to do divorce well. That these couples have to make hundreds or thousands of decisions. That he wasn't sure that he and his wife in a good marriage, they would be enormously stressed to have to make that many decisions. So he asked me if there was any research on openness towards reconciliation among couples who had already filed for divorce, and I was fairly familiar with the literature, but I said I'll look some more, and no, there wasn't any research. And when I thought about my career as a couples therapist, what I always did was once somebody said, okay, I'm going to file for divorce, and once they put that into motion, then I just assume we're in a different domain now. We're in the domain of a peaceful divorce. We're not in a domain of couples therapy anymore. And so here I was talking to somebody in the system who was saying that there seemed to be a percentage of couples who are not so sure that divorce is the right way to solve the problems. And so we decided to do some research on that, and great advantage of having the chief judge be involved in the research is he could just sort of make it happen. So before long, we had data from 2,500 divorcing people, and in fact, we found, I won't go into all the details, we have a published paper on this, there was a lot more ambivalence going on than anyone had assumed. Including in 10% of the couples, both of them thought that their marriage could be potentially reconciled if they got the right help. And then there was another big group in which one of them thought that and the other did not. Okay, so I met with a group of divorce lawyers, Judge Peterson and I did, and presented the findings. And these were collaborative lawyers, committed to, peaceful, non-combative approaches. But all of them were of the assumption, up until that point, that by the time people consulted with them, that they came to their office, that the marriage was over. And that even if somebody was reluctant, in fact, we're a no-fault divorce state, and so it's essentially unilateral divorce, right? And your spouse wants to divorce you, it's okay, let's get on with it. And so we had this data from the very county they worked in, suggesting there's all kinds of ambivalence going on out there. Mm-hmm. And that there are a lot of what we call mixed agenda couples, and that is where somebody was leaning out, certainly, and they in fact leaned out enough to consult a lawyer or mediator, and the other person really wanted to give it another try. They did not want the relationship to end. And then, of course, as couples therapists, we see this all the time. And so I began a 2.5-year project, meeting regularly with a group of 8 collaborative divorce lawyers, to figure out how they could address this issue of ambivalence more meaningfully in their practices. And so they got into it, and we developed tools, and it was kind of like a case consultation group, and they really found their ability to do this without, see, their fear was that if they got into the ambivalence question, that people would think they're saying you shouldn't get divorced, or if I represent you, I won't do a good job. And of course, none of that. That was all, it's sort of like I remember the days learning couples therapy. I thought if I asked about sex, people would be horrified. Well, no, they don't. It's almost always the discomfort of the professional, not the client, right? And so they were now uncovering a lot of ambivalence and of people interested in alternatives. But most people had tried couples therapy before, and the person leaning out, the one we call leaning out, wasn't really sure they wanted to try full court press couples therapy, but they weren't. They were willing to take another look at this decision. So I told them, at that point, I still remember this meeting, where I told them about a process I had used for 20 years in my own work, that I had learned the elements of at a workshop by Betty Carter, famous family therapist, where she talked about how she worked with what I call mixed agenda couples, one leaning out, one leaning in this very innovative way of helping them each separately with their own agenda. For the person leaning out, making a decision that has integrity for self and others, getting past their confusion. For the one leaning in, trying to help them save the marriage. And that what she said was, you can work with people who have different agendas, and everybody knows what's going on, and it can be fine. And I went, oh my goodness, if she could do that, maybe I could do that. So I developed this as a way to work. So I was never frustrated anymore with these couples where they come in and one says, well, I'm here, you know, I don't know why I'm here, and they're so difficult to engage. So I'd done this for 20 years, but never had like a formal protocol on it, and did not have a name for it. I called it, so let's do an assessment phase before we do therapy. And so when I told the lawyers about what I did, and see, this approach does not assume that they want to do therapy.
Right. And I think that's where we often get into trouble as therapists. They show up together, but they don't have the same commitment level to really working together.
Right.
And let me just step back for 1 second here, because you're covering so much important ground. And one of the things I've seen in my practice, which I'm sure is not unusual, even when individuals come in after divorce, they'll say things like, you know, if we could have worked on it, or I really just thought, especially hear this from female partners who maybe burned out, started to lean out. They were leaning out, though, as a test. Like, do you really want this relationship?
Yeah.
They're already kind of leaning, their partner was leaning out, and they couldn't get their partner's attention, of course, from the attachment frame, and they finally start burning out, and they, you know, up the ante by saying, we're going to get divorced then. And then after divorce, they even say things like, I still wanted the relationship, but my partner didn't. Even though they were sending the signal all the way along that they were done. And so that's a really remarkable percentage. Like 30% of divorcing couples, even in the divorcing process, aren't sure they want a divorce. That's just so remarkable.
Well, so, and again, it's couples is two people, and so there's mixed agenda. Okay, one of them may be sure, in some ways the other not. The 30% figure, that there are a couple studies of folks coming to couples therapy, and it really looks like about 30% of the couples coming to couples therapy are mixed agenda couples.
I see. Thank you for that correction.
But in the divorce process, in 40% of the couples in our study, at least one of them thought the relationship could still be salvaged. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
But in terms of people coming to couples therapy, it's probably 30% or so that are mixed agendas. And so what I always say is that when couples come to couples therapy, there's two commitment issues on the table at the same time. One is their commitment to the relationship, and then the other is the commitment to working on the relationship in therapy. Okay, so if people are unsure about their commitment to the relationship, but they know they really want to try couples therapy, and full in, well, then you just do your couples therapy work. Okay, but the mixed agenda couples that I'm referring to, that we see in our Couples in the Brink project, the leaning out person is usually very ambivalent about whether they have it in them, whether they have the energy, whether they have the morale, the hope to even try. And so you get one person gung-ho, and the other not only not sure about the relationship, not sure about the therapy. So what happens?
It really makes good sense that people would be ambivalent about trying therapy when our couples therapy statistics haven't been that strong over the years, really.
Yeah. Well, and yes, and one of the things we do in discernment counseling is we ask people about their history with couples therapy, and it's not always a pretty picture of what people have gotten. That sometimes they get. I mean, they may even like the counselor, but they get sort of communication skills training and other things when they're kind of bleeding. So they often haven't had an adequate dosage of couples therapy.
Yes.
So discernment counseling is designed to prevent half-hearted couples therapy. Okay? Because when these mixed agenda couples come in, and as a therapist, I can do one of two things. I can either try to sell the reluctant person on the therapy, and at risking pursuing them. Right. Right. Like you may have seen these other
big mistake too. a big mistake for us to kind of join that negative pattern by
Exactly.
becoming the pursuer of them and their relationship.
It hasn't worked in their relationship for the last 15 years, but hey, why don't I try it, right? And so then you get a good client and a bad client. You get the client who's ready to do the work, supposedly, right? And then the other reluctant. Or the other thing that the therapists do, and I used to do all of this stuff, is to be kind of cool, rational about it, not put energy, not inject hope, and to say things like, you know, you don't seem to be on the same page about whether you want to stay in the marriage or do the couples therapy. So I can help you as a couple break up. I can help you say, you know, you just need to kind of let me know. I was talking to a couple this week who they had seen a therapist in their emergency situation, classic mixed agenda couple, and what the husband said, the therapist said in the first session was, I don't know if this will work. I don't know if this will work, but we'll have a session together. And then at the end of the session, he said, so let's schedule another one if you like, but you can always cancel. And so that's the low energy. So one thing is too high energy, like we can do this and I can be helpful in pursuing the distance. And the other is the super low energy. You know,
Right.
like you guys are in a tough place, and you know when you figure out what you want to do, let me know.
Right. Which isn't a particularly helpful stance from a therapist who
That's right.
understands the change process and can help people through that. So, Bill, take us back. I interrupted you, and you were talking about coming back to the attorneys.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Bring
Well,
us
it was
back to that, would you?
fine to interrupt because it's a long story, so it's probably good to have it in portions. So, got back to so I told the attorneys about this process that I called assessment or pre-counseling or something, and they said that's what we want to send people to. That we don't want to send them, these ambivalent couples, to marriage counseling or couples therapy as much as we want to send them to a place where they could figure out their next steps.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's so,
that was,
because once they've entered, I mean, it's really amazing to have divorce attorneys willing to do that, because it's so, even with ambivalent couples, once they kind of get in that system, the way that it works to kind of blow up the relationship or
oh.
add to blowing up the relationship is pretty huge.
And these are, you know, collaborative attorneys who are committed to not blowing up relationships. It's just that the option of taking a time out and relooking at the decision was never on their radar screen. Okay,
Right.
they were like surgeons assuming that the decision to do surgery had already been made and now let's do it well. Okay,
Yeah.
so they said, we love what you're describing. That's where we want to send people. What should we call it? Because I said I didn't have a name. So our little group that day, you know, in Edina, Minnesota, came up with the name Discernment Counseling. And then I said, what I'll do. See, they had wanted to send me their couples for therapy, and I just have a small practice. I teach at the university. You know, I couldn't possibly take their referrals for therapy, but I could take referrals for discernment counseling, which is a maximum of 5 sessions.
Hmm.
And I said, okay, send me these couples, and I'll develop discernment counseling into a protocol that I can teach other therapists, so it isn't just me. So that was the deal we created, and then out of that came the Minnesota Couples in the Brink Project at the university, where we do training. And then out of that, just to fill it in, Minnesota, the Minnesota Couples in the Brink Project, the university is focusing on Minnesota therapists. And then last year, we decided, the university people and I decided that I and my daughter Elizabeth would focus on the training of therapists nationally, because the university isn't really set up for that.
Right. So that's a really cool story, how that's developed across time. Now, one thing I'd really like you to be able to clarify for us is it's discernment counseling, and it is counseling of sorts, but it's not what we would typically do with a couple entering and saying, or, you know, it's like, I'm not necessarily just going to start doing emotionally focused therapy. There's a way to kind of step back and determine, you know, is this a couple who's really ready to engage in therapy or not, or are they this mixed agenda, meaning one wants out and one wants in? So help us understand a little bit about that distinction between what we would typically do or how we enter that process.
The great advantage of having a name and a description for discernment counseling and for mixed agenda couples is that you can put on your website, we have on our Minnesota Couples on the Brink Project website, we have a description of the kind of couples that this is suited for and those not. And we describe discernment counseling. So, we're in an age when consumers, want to be informed. And so people can pre-screen, if you will, okay? And what tends to happen is the leaning in spouse whose partner has been reluctant to do couples therapy, maybe having tried it before, says, look at this website. This is something different. It's a short-term commitment, and it's not couples therapy. It's just something else. And then that person looks at it and says, yeah, I could do that. I'm not 100% convinced that I want to divorce. And there's a lot at stake. And what we say the goals are, by the way, and it's right there on the website, the goals are more confidence and clarity about the direction for the relationship based on a deeper understanding of what's happened in the relationship and each person's contributions. Okay, that's the little elevator speech. So it's not intended to improve the relationship. Couples therapy is intended to improve the couple's relationship. Right. And so it's an easier way in the door. So people, mostly now they call asking for discernment counseling because they have looked at it. We get referrals from lawyers and others. And then we do a brief telephone interview with each person to make sure they understand what this is. And the big message for therapists is you actually have to unlearn some of the things you do with couples when you do the work. Okay. And one of the ways that helps you unlearn is, and this is the big technique I got from Betty Carter, is that the intense work is with one person in the room at a time. When the couple are in the room at the same time, it's low key. It's the opposite of EFT at that point. Okay.
Exactly, totally opposite.
Right. The intense work is one-to-one. And then after you've done you both have them come in each time. You have a brief period at the beginning, check in, talk to one, and then a carefully orchestrated summary that person gives the other. So you bring the other spouse in the room, and the one you've just been talking to gives a summary of a take-home, something they have gotten from the individual session that they're going to keep thinking about, and you actually help them prepare that. So there's have to be some emotion there, but you don't ask the other person to respond to it. Okay, they're reporting, and then you do the other person, and then they do their summary. And what you're working on at this stage is, if you will, differentiation, so that they could reattach. Okay, because the leaning in person is often desperate. They're the ones with the attachment injury. Their life has been turned upside down. I mean, think of the classic, the guy who, he didn't know his wife was in threatening divorce, was wanting his love, right?
Exactly.
His recommitment, right?
Right.
And so he's panicking and doing all kinds of things that make him the least attractive husband on the planet. Scolding, criticizing, weeping, telling the kids mommy's going to throw daddy out, calling her parents, threatening suicide, all kinds of things that I've not been through that, so I don't know what I'd be doing, but it's a tough place to be.
Right, and then she is just saying, there it is, it's still all about you and what you want, and when are you ever going to hear me?
That's right. That's right. So with him, in the one-to-one conversations, we're helping him do two things: bring his best self to this crisis, not his worst self, and then secondly, try to help him hear her, hear what her pain is, and try to understand his contributions to her pain. And to the extent that he begins to get that, to share that in that summary. And so, and he may do that, but I say to him, don't expect her to leap into your arms at that point. She may be angry, like, I was just thinking of a couple last week. He was finally saying, and I think authentically, what she would wanted him to hear all these years about him being checked out. And he said it powerfully, and then she was mad when she talked to me next that it took dragging him to the edge of divorce before he began to get it? And how come I got through to him and she didn't? Okay, so that's where I started with her in that individual conversation. Now, with the leaning out person, we are, of course, identifying with the pain and the reasons for divorce. And the discernment counseling focuses on 3 paths. Decision about path 1, which is stay the course, stay married as you've been. Usually people want to rule that out. Path 2 is separation or divorce. And path 3 is 6 months of therapy and perhaps other services with divorce off the table, and each person having a personal agenda for change. So that's how the discernment goes. So with the leaning out person, I'm helping them think about what's happened, the pain they're in, their hopelessness, and helping them focus on whether to try path 3 or not, and to help them look at their contributions. So there is no relationship in which only one person has all of the contributions to the problems. And a lot of times the leaning out person has long since given up on looking at themselves. We help them look at themselves too.
Right. So this place where you're talking about, one of the trainings I heard you say, I was really struck by the congruence of it or the wisdom of it, because in emotionally focused therapy, when I'm training therapists how to do emotionally focused therapy, I'll often talk about having a different therapeutic stance with the pursuing partner and the withdrawing partner. Of course, we're doing that in the couple therapy with the couple both in the room. But you said something about that therapeutic stance being different, when you're in those individual sessions. And at first it maybe struck you something like, how could I do that or get away with that? Or do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Maybe you can fill us in on that part.
Yeah, like with the leaning in person, I've really been struck by how quickly I can get to challenging. How quickly. In a way that would be much more difficult with a partner in the room, because it would feel like I'm ganging up on this person. So say with going back to the couple I was just referring to, with this husband. So he starts off by complaining, by saying how hard it is to have his wife be, thinking of leaving him. And of course, then I sympathize with that. But very soon, after a little sympathy with there, I ask him, does he want to save his marriage? So I'm trying to focus him on the future, not just his upset that she's doing this to him. And, he says yes. I ask him why. He talks about that. And then I say, do you want me to help you do that? See, this is the insight I got from Betty Carter. You can be that direct.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. And so then I say, so that means I'm kind of like your coach. And that means I may be tough on you. Okay, bring it on. And then I might say, if your main response to her complaints and her pain behind it is to say you're picking on me, you're not going to get where you want to get. As hard as it is, and I know she's got her part in this, okay, because there's 2 sides.
Right.
But at this point, it's going to take somebody to take leadership for your relationship if it's going to survive. If you're going to have a chance to get to path 3, somebody's going to have to step up in leadership. Are you interested? That could be within 12 minutes of my first one-to-one conversation with him. And then when he lapses back at minute 16, I'll say, Joe, you're doing it again. You're doing it again. And I get it. I get how hard this is. If you keep going there and don't really look inside, you're not going to get where you want to get. So, I could never do that with her in the room. Could never in a million years do that with her in the room.
That's right. Too much energy would spark around defensive-ness and trying to look right in front of their partner, trying to make their partner bad or defending themselves in some way. Right.
So that's an example.
That's a really great example. And so that leaning in spouse, they have all that energy for change, and so you're trying to redirect that energy almost in a coaching sort of a way about what they can do, like behaviorally, to really help hold on so their partner may want to give therapy a try, which is then going to, once they are committed to path 3, that then you can you'll shift gears again back to what you usually do with a couple.
That's right. With the intermediate step, if as the sessions go on, it looks like they're moving towards path 3, then the focus is on each person developing a personal agenda for change, what they're going to work on in the path 3 therapy. And here's how we focus this. It's what you know or have learned recently about yourself that is an obstacle to the kind of marriage, the kind of relationship you want. Not only in this marriage, but would be in any marriage. I like to say you can't divorce yourself. Okay, so not accommodations to live with a difficult person, right? No, it's what about me? So this guy who says what I do is when there's conflict or when there's stress, I check out and I go away. He's seeing that. That's something, whether this marriage lasts or not, whether his wife divorces him or not, if he ever wants another relationship, that's what he's going to have to work on. Wow. And so that goes on his agenda. And maybe with the wife, I'm thinking of a recent couple where she tends to just as he underfunctions, she overfunctions. And she realizes she does it at work. She does it in her other relationships. She doesn't declare her own needs. She doesn't step up in an appropriate. And then what she does with her husband, then when he underfunctions, she gives him books on relationships. Okay, tries to teach him and be the coach. And so her getting a look in our one-to-one time at what that is about her that would be healthy for her to work on, which would be good for the marriage, but also good for herself in this or any other relationship. So we're working on that agenda. So by session 4, they each have written out, with my coaching, 3 or 4 aspects of self that they want to work on in path 3, and they exchange lists and we talk about it. And then in the last session, we go through a set of principles for this path 3 reconciliation work. We read through them. This is going to be my top priority for the next 6 months after my kids. I promise that I'm going to work on myself and not just wait for the other person to work on themselves. I commit to, if it's not going well, to raise a concern early and not just run out the clock. A number of other things, okay? And we go through those. We discuss them. They air their concerns about them. They sign. Okay.
That's getting real commitment out of these couples.
They sign. And then the next session, we do couples therapy with whatever model you have, but I say, this is the first session of couples therapy.
So you let them know, they sign, that completes this discernment process, and then you shift into doing the couple therapy that you would do, but you have this really great commitment both to work on the relationship and to work on self.
Ideally. Now, we're all human beings, right? So sometimes it's a commitment that somebody made and then they start to back away from, that something that challenged them on. Okay? Sometimes, and by the way, this is something that I learned to do over the years and we train therapists to do. Sometimes you started couples therapy after discernment counseling or not, and then you find out that somebody is ambivalent about continuing with it, okay, because they're ambivalent about the relationship, whatever, then you can shift back into discernment work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in other words, what I don't do is pursue somebody to keep going with couples therapy. I move into discernment. Okay,
right.
so I'm thinking about it. Yeah, so I won't go into another example at the moment. But discernment is either at the first phase. Of course, they can also choose to divorce, or it's you return to it because it's easier to say, yeah, I'll work on me, and then the hard work starts, and it's like, whoa. I had a supervisor who used to say that for most couples, we say somebody around here's got to grow, and I'll be damned if it'll be me. Okay,
right.
And so you may be a couple months into the therapy when I start to realize, if I'm one of the spouses, oh, this is serious, and okay, then we may need a recommitment phase.
Right. So I would love to hear that example that you had come up to your mind if you still have it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple where the wife was the one leaning out, burned out on pursuing him. It was the classic pursuer distancer, and he. Let me back up now. He was the leaning out one. He couldn't take her demandingness and pursuit all the time. That's what it was, and she still had energy to keep trying, and he was listless about, I don't know, I've been at this so long, she's never going to change, blah blah blah. But he wasn't. He had been through a divorce once. He wasn't enthusiastic about going through divorce again. They had 2 kids, but he had no energy and was demoralized and thinking of leaving, which of course triggered his wife's panic about losing him, right? And so when I did the discernment process, I worked with her around her anxiety-driven pursuit of him. It was pretty strong. I mean, it was. Why did you play tennis with your friend when you never play it with me? And then he would just retreat. With her, she began to realize as we did this that this was in her, that she dealt with a lot of anxiety, and then she suggested on her own, which I agreed with, that she saw a colleague of mine to work on her anxiety and separate that out now from the marital stuff. And through our work in discernment counseling and her work with the therapist, she was making headway in not pursuing, of allowing a better boundary in the relationship. So I'm working with him, and I remember this climactic session where his mantra was, she can't change, she'll never change. And I would say, let's talk about your part. And he was beginning to look at himself more and so on. And I remember this session, it was clear that she was changing. And so with her out of the room, him in the room, I looked at him, called him by name, and I said, one thing that's clear to me is that your wife can change because I see it. And he admitted, see it. And I said, what's maybe the issue is, can you change? Can you be healthy and assert boundaries and connect in this or any other relationship? That was the moment, because he dropped the thing that she'll never change. He dropped it at that point, and he became more open. That's when he opened up. That's when he talked about his father and lots of other things. So when he did his summary at the end, he was more vulnerable than she had ever seen him.
Wow, that's a powerful
and
story.
so they decided to do the path 3. Well, about 12 weeks into the therapy, he came in again doing his, we had some arguments this week, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere, this counseling, it's cost a lot of money, I don't blah, 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 blah. And instead of pursuing him, I said, so I'm so glad you told me you're not so sure at this point that you want to keep doing this and it's hard in the marriage. I suggest we do a little more discernment work. Okay, so we did a couple of I helped the wife hold on and not panic, and to stay the course she was on, being healthier, to not absorb, and get reactive to him. And with him, I listened and also challenged him that, now that the going was getting tough, was he still on board with what he said and needed to work on himself? And then the second session, in the middle of that, he said to her, I'm sorry I did that. I realize I've done that in a marriage. It gets hard and I pull back. And that's when I realized I'm doing, let's get back in. And they finished well.
Right. Oh, that's such a great story. So it strikes me, I'm always thinking of things from the attachment lens, how when they come in and they're kind of self-selecting, maybe not always, but if once people are trained, they can have that on their website and people can self-select for that, or if it's not there yet, we can help move them into that. But that we are then, as the therapist, the container, the secure attachment container for their attachment panic in those initial sessions, and helping them to be able to kind of move a little bit differently or slow down that panic enough that they can assess, they can do some self-assessment, and kind of look at the relationship history, and decide how they want to move with each other, and if they do want to do that. And then we move into actually the therapy part if they agree on that path 3. Am I hearing that right?
I think that's a lovely frame on it. Yeah, that's right. And particularly the attachment panic is with the leaning in person. So
Yes.
what I keep emphasizing is they're in different emotional trajectories. And for the leaning in person, they really benefit from. And again, this is where Betty Carter helped me so much. Like, I'm on both of their sides, right? And that's what good couples therapy is. But this seems to be the opposite, because somebody is desperate to save the relationship, and the other's trying to decide whether to even try. And I can be on both of their sides.
And that's so important that we can have that flexibility to. And I would say the leaning out partners in attachment panic too. It's just the more panicked they are, the less engaged they are, because that's how avoidance kind of demonstrates, right?
Well, some of them are, but some of them have been thinking about this for years, and they're less so. Some of them have been involved in affairs. Some of them are. So the leaning out person isn't necessarily in that state. Some are and some aren't, and that's why and what I've learned in teaching about this approach is that some of the art of the discernment counseling with the leaning out person is to fully identify with the pain and the disillusionment that leads them would lead them to choose path 2, to really to validate those things, but also to challenge them to look at self. See, it's easy to just sort of be empathic, and how do you also challenge? And I remember with a recent case where the wife was always doing yes but when it came to anything about herself. Okay, and along around session 3, with her being completely stuck, 4 kids, security reasons to stay, but he can't change, but not doing a look at herself. And I had connected with her enough by that point to process our conversations, that when I suggested something that might be her contribution, she gave me well, hypothetically that might be true, Bill, but and that I was worried for her, that she's making now a very big decision about her future, her family's future, without the kind of soul searching that I think would help her be confident in that decision. And that I also worried, and I say this sometimes to leaning out partners who are unwilling to pull the plug. Okay, this is where some panic would come in, and also they're worried about how everyone else in the world will see their decision. So what they do is they hang in there in ambivalence, leaning out until the other person can't take it anymore.
Right.
Then the leaning in person becomes the leaning out and pulls the plug on the marriage. And I will tell people that's what I'm worried is going to happen. Okay, that if the leaning out person just sort of hangs back and doesn't really get into what's happened and what's both people's part to make a decision, that there'll be some huge crisis that will occur that will, quote, force a decision, and that they could look back on this years hence with some regret.
Right.
One of the things I'll say is that, if people have young children, that, in 20 years or so, when your kids are looking to get married, and if you choose the divorce path, they may be asking you, well, what was going on then? I mean, we know what you said then, as kids, but what's the story? And will you feel that how you handle this process, that you feel good about that as you recount the story of how the marriage of the parents ended? So that's an example of a challenge at some point that I'll put to the leaning out person. And of course, you can only do this if you're thoroughly connected with them at an affective level. I'm emphasizing, of course, the challenge part of it, because that's some of the high wire act in this, but it's all based on an affective connection with people.
Right. So that's such an important thing to say, to be with them, effective with their affect. And I'm really hearing you that it's so true that many times, I'm thinking of attachment avoidance, panic in a different, and maybe in a little bit different way, but I do want to acknowledge what you're saying, that really people do burn out and they do detach. They start to go through a period of detachment. And that this is a way for them to really look at, you know, if they're there, how far into that process are they, and is there kind of a way back? It reminds me, I just got an email this morning from a fellow who said that they're in a long-term relationship. Basically, I think they've just grown apart. And he says, my career has taken me other ways. We've changed over the years. We don't have the common ground anymore, so I'm planning to divorce. Seems like as people change, they can't, if they don't change together, you know, kind of what hope is for the relationship, and I think my only choice is to divorce. And I thought, this, and he said, I don't think, I know you promote couples counseling for change, but I'm happy with the changes I've made. I'm just not happy that the changes I've made make my wife unhappy. And I thought, maybe this is kind of the perfect kind of candidate for discernment counseling.
That's a perfect candidate for discernment counseling. For one thing, I don't buy what he's saying, that this is all, you know, like I did practice law for 20 years and now I'm ready for other adventures. No, there's powerful stuff underneath that, okay? And so part of what you do with him is, of course, hear all that and then try to get to what's underneath this.
Right. There's some coping strategies for the way that they've disconnected across time and the change, and that he sees an unhappy wife because of whatever he's involved in, and that leans him farther out, right? But
yes. A big part of this work with the leaning out person is for those who have what I call these soft reasons for the divorce, that we grew apart, or just different people, we got married so young, we don't, you know, I care for her but I don't love her, that, you know, in the way as husbands, is to really help them look at the process of growing apart as thousands of decisions that they each made. Thousands of decisions to not turn to turn away, that particularly probably came in after the honeymoon phase. Thousands of choices.
And so they have all of this experience with each other of not connecting, not sharing, not feeling close and special.
Right. And the advantage of saying that to the leaning out person in that way, the leaning in one's usually ready to cop to all of that, okay? But the leaning out one is that they will bring the same coping with the middle phase of a relationship into their next relationship. In other words, they have an external locus of control. We just sort of grew differently, you know, the canoes separated. And a lot of this work is about helping people with an internal locus of control. Okay?
Which is really the beauty of therapy, too, when we can really create change kind of from the inside out. But this original structure helps people to, in a very brief period of time, begin to acknowledge those internal structures.
That's right, and so the time limitation puts some urgency to it. By the way, in the full protocol, the first session is 2 hours, and the subsequent ones are an hour and a half. So we have a little more time to do the joint and separate conversations, and then each session I announce, this is session 2, and we decide each session whether to meet again. The leaning out person is only committed to one session when they come, and then one of the discernment decisions in session 1 is whether to have session 2, and so on. So you notice we're never wanting to pursue or trap the leaning out person. So a lot of time, almost everybody comes back for more than one session. And the leaning in person often feels a little boost of morale when their partner says, well, this has been a useful process and I want to continue. I want to do another session. Yay! That helps settle them a little bit.
So encouraging, like, okay, I can settle down just a little bit.
I can settle a little bit. That's right. That's right.
Well, let's talk, Bill, for a minute as we wrap up here about the protocol and how people can access the protocol. I have a little link
I think that you're moving into a new training segment or a continuation of kind of the first launch. Can you talk about that? And I'll put up the link for people.
Yeah, so it's discernmentcounseling.com, and it's 25 hours of online training with access to Q&A. We have some live sessions where people can call in. What we've learned is we originally thought people could learn to do this in a 5-hour workshop, and we learned that's not the case. So we got 25 hours, and then a cohort. So we're still forming our first cohort of people who are learning this together. We're creating a network of therapists who want this to be a learning community. Any question, I just did an online case consultation together today, and the idea is that any consultation anybody gets is part of a library of consultations. Okay, so that we all can learn together. And I'm learning what it takes.
The Q&A parts of this program have just been fascinating, and us being able to bring particular questions and have you respond to them is such a powerful part of the program.
Thank you, and I learned so much from people's questions as well. Then we develop new modules. The other thing I want to say is we're also creating an alliance of marriage and divorce professionals, because we have a separate training, an online training for mediators and divorce lawyers, and we've got leaders in those fields who are interested in allying with couples therapists who learn discernment counseling. So we have a protocol for these folks to assess divorce ambivalence and refer people to therapists for discernment counseling. And then, of course, when people choose to divorce, as many will, to send them to lawyers and mediators who will help them have a soft landing. So we're trying to create something around this, not just a skill set, but a way for people to actually use this in their communities.
A way for them to be found and to work together, create that whole network of support. So now the link that people are going to is a get more information link, because I think this isn't, you're starting a new launch, but it's not quite up and going yet, right? So
yeah, so we're using an approach that's been used for online trainings, where you create cohorts, and so you have a period in which people come in and everyone is learning together, and we support them together, and then you have another cohort. So there'll be a new cohort starting. It's actually extension of the first one, sort of like cohort 1B, as opposed to just everybody sort of being on their own.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of that's an internet training model. I want to put a plug in for my daughter Elizabeth, Doherty Thomas, who has a business and internet background, and she's brought a passion to this and skills that I never would have had, so that this can be a one-to-many training and a library of learning, a community of learning is what I really have to give her credit for pulling off.
Yeah, she's fantastic. We're little partners in crime here with loving the web-based, internet kind of based trainings.
Yes.
And she's so good at that and so helpful also with all the marketing pieces and creating ways for that kind of business training is also part of what you're offering. Those that become involved in the discernment counseling, you're also helping that network and the marketing network as well.
Yeah, we want discernment counseling to make a difference for couples in this country. And I'm doing some training in Australia as well on this. And that means not just therapists having the skills, but the public knowing about it, referral sources knowing about it. We like discernment counseling to be a buzzword out there so that people who would otherwise not get help would go for help. Yeah. And that means we just can't do therapist training. It has to be bigger than that.
So now I have a question, because some people are doing couples therapy, maybe not feeling very effective doing couples therapy, or don't want a caseload full of a whole bunch more couples. But I think this protocol, they still could, that could be an active part of a big business, or of including in their business. And not maybe necessarily adding to their ongoing caseload.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, because you don't have to be the one who does the couples therapy, okay? And so I just have room for a small practice because I have so much else in my life. And if I saw for therapy, everybody saw in discernment counseling, I'd never do any more discernment counseling. So I want to maximize my discernment counseling because I keep learning it as I go. I can teach it better. So I have 3 or 4 really good couples therapists who I do warm handoffs to. Okay, so the therapist has access to the couple's personal agendas for change. And then I follow up to make sure that the referral has taken. So somebody could do discernment counseling, letting people know when they come to them that if they choose path 3, the therapy path, that they'll be referring out.
Right. That's really great. I really appreciate you making this available to people who come on to Talk Time and having a way for them to get, directly to you and to the discernment counseling. And anybody that joins will see me there because I'm thoroughly enjoying the training and your expertise in developing this and being able to work with these mixed agenda couples. And I really appreciate the distinction of, what a mixed agenda couple is and helping us listen for that when couples come in the door and get that specific sort of training.
Well, I'm honored to have you part of it. When people who are as experienced and accomplished as you get something out of it, it warms my heart.
Well, I appreciate it. Really appreciate your interactions and being able to interact with you, Bill. And I have a little offer too for people who are part of Talk Time because I'm doing, of course, emotionally focused therapy, but I work with a lot of therapists. And I try to increase that access to me too through doing Hold Me Tight workshops for therapists and their partners, so people can experience that. So anybody that's part of this call, you can get a discount on your registration to be with me in January in San Diego or February in Costa Rica. So we want to stay far away from me.
What about Minnesota? We have a lot of hotel rooms in Minnesota in January and February. Okay, sorry.
That's right. I'm not coming there in January or February, Bill. I'll see you online, but not in. I did a lot of my graduate degree there in Minneapolis.
Okay. I thought I'd try.
Those streets, those the stay out of the wind, cross the street tunnels that you have, those walkways. I know those all too well.
Okay, I can't fool you.
Yeah, it's very hard. So. Just thank you again, Bill, for being on with me and helping people know what's available here so that they can be more clear. One of the things that, really hurts us as therapists, I think, is to have couples come in and we have hope for them and then they don't come back, or we end up like, do I even think this couple should stay together? Do I even have enough hope for this couple with how far apart they are, how far down the line in detachment they are? And to be able to kind of step back and move into this different sort of a protocol, I think we didn't talk about it. We're really kind of running out of time, but when they choose the not therapy path, I think there's also a different flavor that they have from going through this process, like feeling more settled about going through the process. Yeah, and so that's helpful to the family and to the children if they do enter into divorce.
That's right. Either the path to the divorce path, based on a better understanding of who they are and what's happened, is entirely unacceptable. Nobody has to apologize for that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Okay, Bill,
Great.
Well, I don't know that we got many questions, but people sure are writing that they appreciated it and they feel fortunate to be here and to listen to you talk and be able to have access to the work that you're doing, and I appreciate that as well. So thank you so much.
Okay, great pleasure. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye. See y'all later.
Okay.